From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
With his student loan forgiveness plan stuck at the Supreme Court, President Biden moves forward with a second piece of his student debt bonanza. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Colin Levy. Next month, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in the case against Joe Biden's plan to outright forgive $10,000 per person in student loans across the board for borrowers earning up to $125,000 a year. And the betting now seems to be that the justices will say that the White House lacks the power to spend this money that hasn't been approved by Congress. But on Tuesday, the Biden administration moved forward on a second piece of the president's student debt agenda involving income-based repayment plans. Kim, I wonder if you can just set the table for us and give a sense of what the administration is proposing to do.
Sure. Something to know, we've had income-based repayment plans in the federal loan system for a long time. They've been around since 1992. The complaint among those who would like them to have these kind of changes is that they claim that it's too much paperwork, it's been too hard to use, they're not generous enough. So this is a Biden administration as it is a kind of second piece to its own student loan overhaul. And what they're going to do here, there's a number of different provisions, but the big one is that they're going to have the amount percentage-wise of discretionary income that you have to pay back every month on your undergraduate loans if you're enrolled in one of these plans. So it had been that you had to pay about 10% of your discretionary income in repayment plans. They're going to lower that to 5%. For certain borrowers who have incomes below 225% of the federal poverty line, you wouldn't have to make any monthly payments on their loans. And then, moreover, if you enroll in this and you make your payments, for many people, you will actually have the rest of your loans wiped out after 20 years. Or if you borrowed only $12,000 or less to begin with as an original loan balance, that could be wiped out after 10 years of repayments. And we can talk about some of the implications, but that latter provision essentially is something that would make lower costing degrees, in particular community college degrees, maybe essentially free, requiring that people only pay very minimal payments over 10 years and then get the rest of it wiped out. And that is interesting to me only because this was something Biden wanted to do as part of his Build Back Better agenda. It didn't come to fruition, so this seems to be a backdoor way that the White House is trying to get it across the line.
According to the Journal story on this, about 8 million borrowers are in some kind of income-based repayment program, and the cost estimates for this change in the program, according to analysis by the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, it could be between $70 billion over 10 years up to $450 billion over a longer period. And that, of course, depends on who takes advantage of the program, how many people, whether the program results in increased tuition. And Colin, I guess that's what I worry most about this kind of model. I mean, for all the complaints about the first piece of Biden's plan, which is just to blanket forgive $10,000 for every borrower who is under a certain income threshold, I don't think that sends a great signal to borrowers or students about how seriously to think about these numbers when they're signing the loan documents. On the other hand, that kind of one-time jubilee, we're going to do this now, and maybe people will hope that it happens again, but there's no guarantee on it, has a sort of limited set of incentives. Whereas this kind of a program, which is in place and people can count on it, I worry that it's going to only make everyone in the college market more price insensitive than they already are. Because if borrowers think, I'm going to get into an income-based repayment program after I graduate from the school, it doesn't really matter how much my total loan debt is when I get out of here, because I'm going to get to pay 5% of my discretionary income, and then it's all going to go away. By the way, schools are also going to know that. And so I don't see why this is not just going to push tuition, the cost of college up, which is already the problem.
Yeah, Kyle, you make several good points here. I mean, the big one is the numbers on this in terms of the federal government spending is enormous. And by the way, all that spending gets paid in taxes. And so it's important to remember here that now you have all these blue collar workers who didn't take out loans, and they're going to be the ones who end up absorbing the payments in the form of higher taxes. And I found it really interesting when I looked at the announcement. I saw that Education Department Undersecretary said that for the first time, they were going to be creating a student loan safety net in this country. That statement really struck me because I sort of grew up thinking that as the student loan safety net, the safety net was supposed to be a college education. A college degree still confers significant financial benefits, no matter who you're talking to. And so, when you look on an annual basis, you see that earnings for college graduates are still about 84% higher than high school graduates. And if you look at people with, even higher level degrees, those numbers keep going up to about 300% of the salary of someone with a high school degree. So when we look at this change, this sort of incremental change from 10% down to paying 5%, when financial planners talk to college graduates, recent college graduates about, how to spend their money and how they're going to handle things when they're first out of college, they typically tell them sort of a 50-30-20 rule, right? That's 50% of your take-home pay is supposed to go to your needs, 30% goes to your wants, and 20% goes to savings. That's now, I guess, an incredibly old-fashioned way to look at the way that people spend money. But just if you even think about that 30% of income that's supposedly the fund budget, right? We can't give 10% of that 30% to paying for the education that's actually sculpting your life. I think it just fundamentally changes, as you were saying, the relationship that borrowers have and students have with the value of their education.
Well, let me pick up on the point that Colin makes about the safety net and how the safety net used to be a college degree. And I would commend to people's attention an analysis of this income-driven repayment stuff written by Adam Looney. It's at the Brookings Institution. The title is Biden's Income-Driven Repayment Plan Would Turn Student Loans into Untargeted Grants. And he makes a lot of real fascinating points. One of them is that when there's no ultimate financial accountability for how graduates are doing in terms of earnings compared to their debt, that also gives colleges an incentive to set up programs that are not really going to give them the education that will allow them to increase their earning power. So here's a line. He says, "My belief is that increases in undergraduate financial aid increase college costs primarily by increasing the number of lower quality programs and the students who enroll in them. My fear with regards to overall college costs is that institutions will have an incentive to create valueless programs and aggressively recruit students into those programs with promises they will be free under an IDR plan, an income-driven repayment plan." And Kim, there has been some great reporting on examples of that. One that comes to mind, I believe it was one of the New York universities, and the Journal had some reporting on people, I think, in the film school, and they were being drawn into these programs and racking up huge amounts of tuition payments and debt in order to pay for the programs. And yet the earnings were nowhere even close to what you would need in order to pay off that debt. And again, I worry that the more that we delink the paying of college from the underlying economics of what's going on here, the more you're going to get that kind of gaming of the system.
Right. The way this is set up, it's deliberately set up to most benefit people who leave college and don't earn much money, because you qualify most fully if your income is below 225% of the poverty level. And that comes out to about $30,000 for an individual and about $62,000 for a family of four. Those are the administration's own estimates of this. So as that very good analysis points out, that's going to encourage a lot of programs in drama and the liberal arts. Go get your degree in cosmetology because you're going to spend a lot to get it. And by the way, the colleges are likely to charge you a lot to get it because there's not going to be any more guards on inflation. They know that all this money is just going to be sitting there in a federal pot, and why shouldn't they benefit from it? And so there's going to be a lot of incentives for people to go into those programs. But if you want to be a nurse, or you want to be an engineer, or you want to get a major in math or computer science, you're more likely to have to pay a full price because you've been going to the best programs in the field and because you are likely to come out and have a better education. So it really is a bunch of perverse incentives. And I would also just go back to my point again, too. It's pretty tricky of the administration as well, too. Pretty slick. As Colin noted, the education department is celebrating that they now have a safety net. And that's another way of saying that they've essentially created a program to make college free for certain people that are going into certain types of degrees. And that was something they wanted to do part as a Build Back Better agenda. And it didn't go through in part because it's so costly. The estimates are that this part of the program is going to cost anywhere from $70 billion over 10 years to up to $500 billion in the longer term. Add that to what Biden has already proposed with his student loan debt forgiveness. And taxpayers are looking at paying, trillions for these programs.
I refreshed my memory here on this New York story while Kim was speaking, and here's the beginning of it, a Wall Street Journal report. Recent film program graduates of Columbia University who took out federal student loans had a median debt of $181,000. Yet 2 years after earning their master's degrees, half of the borrowers were making less than $30,000 a year. The headline, if you want to look that up, is Financially Hobbled for Life, the elite master's degrees that don't pay off. Columbia and other top universities push master's programs that fail to generate enough income for graduates to keep up with six-figure federal loans. And that's obviously terrible for the students that end up in those situations, financially hobbled for life, as the headline says. But it's a great moneymaker for those schools. And I'm sure subsidizes all sorts of other programs, all sorts of other things that the administration and the faculty want to do. Colin, the other thing that jumps out at me of this Brookings Institution report is this author says that there's also a high potential for abuse. And he writes, a large share of student debt is not used to pay tuition, but is given to students in cash for rent, food, and other expenses. At public colleges and for-profits, living expenses represent more than half the estimated cost of attendance. That's another way that this pushes up costs, because it pushes up tuition when colleges are more interested in drawing students by building the fancy facilities that will get people to come to campus and say, wow, this is a place that I want to spend 4 years or 6 years or 8 years if you're talking about a potential graduate degree. And yet that is something that ends up sometimes on the student loan debt. And here we're talking about a federal taxpayer subsidy that will just ratchet up those costs.
No question. I mean, look, money's fungible, as you say. Who knows exactly where it goes? To elaborate, too, I mean, I think there's something that's really culturally wrong here and potentially distorting in this, because it's with our discomfort with anyone having to make any sacrifices to get ahead. I was thinking back as Kim was talking about my own experiences in college. And when you see someone from a low-income family who has to borrow heavily to go to college, that's hard. And it seems unfair that a rich kid just graduates from college debt-free. But we also seem to have forgotten that sacrificing and working hard for something conveys a sense of value on it. I went to a school that had a lot of heiresses walking around, and they didn't really think that much of their college education. It was just, another privilege like the ones they'd had all their lives. And we used to call them the trustafarians. But guess what? Many of them didn't really go out and make much of their degrees. The ones who did were the ones who knew that they'd put a lot into being where they were. And I think you've sort of seen that throughout American history, that meritocracy and that rise from having less and working hard for a new place in society. The children of blue-collar workers, children of immigrants who have that fire inside and are just incredibly motivated to go out in education and use it and succeed. So you don't need to forgive the loans for those people. And taking that responsibility away, I think, is also dangerous.